Man.
They still complain. And your clients probably will too.
What's architecture really about? Archispeak is a show that dares to peek under the architectural kimono, exposing what architecture really is, what it is that architects really do, and show you why we are passionate about our chosen profession. I'm Evan Troxel. Join Neil Pan, Cormac Phelan, and me as we have a casual conversation about all things architecture, which includes all the stuff people don't talk about. Think you already know what architecture is really about? Tune in to find out. It's time for some Archispeak.
Well, what are we talking about? We're talking about, the work balance. The one thing, that golden ring that everybody's shooting for. That how can I have the, best life possible that is part of our, is my work, my life, everything is just this, everything is perfect. No, I mean, isn't that really what most people are shooting for? I mean, if you think about it, we go to school because we want to better our lives. I mean, why did you guys go to school? Was it to have a better job? I came from a working class automotive family. Father and grandfather both retired from General Motors. I was actually the first kid in our family to go to college, to graduate college. So I was shooting for a better life. But I was also, an extremely creative kid that wanted to create. So I wanted, to have my cake and eat it too. I wanted to have a better life, make the more money and all this other stuff more than, didn't want to have the 9 to 5, lunch pail type life. I wanted to have a profession. I wanted to have something that my, that I could look back on and say, okay, I worked hard to do this, but it was something that I loved and I enjoyed, and it wasn't just punching the time card and going in, going out, and all that other stuff, and so, but that, kind of golden ring that I was talking about is these two articles that, we were talking about from ArchDaily, the Andrew Maynard's article on work balance, and then kind of almost a rebuttal article from Anthony Ling that was basically talking about, he was basically talking about his perspective of the Andrew Maynard article, talking about, his perspective about the work-life, work balance type thing.
Let me jump in here because I think we're lucky enough to have enough perspective on our careers at this point. Not that they're over yet, but not that the economy's trying to help us there. But I think a little bit my view has changed as I've gotten older. And what I mean by that is early on, I started actually, Cormac, similar to you. I was the first one in my family to go to college, and I don't know if I really did it to have a better life or not to have the 8 to 5 sort of job. Although that's what I kind of like about even architecture now is to find that life work balance is to try and do it 8 to 5. But when I started, I think I enjoyed working hours, and certainly didn't enjoy weekends. Working on those and missing out on events. But it didn't seem to matter to me as much because maybe the only person I was really hurting was myself. Although maybe I wasn't being very considerate of my friends or other family at that time. But, I did it because that's what I loved. I was good at it and I enjoyed it, and it didn't seem to be a problem. And I think over time, as you know, I'm no longer the CAD monkey, although I am doing that now to make a living. But as I grew in the different firms that I worked for to having a position of more responsibility, I tended not to have to work quite as late or quite as much. And then now it's like with a family, I really don't want to. I want to spend more time with them, although sometimes work is a good escape from the kids, which sounds kind of odd, but it's true. If you have children, you understand. So I think that your perspective a little bit changes over time, and it's not always going to be the same.
Well, okay, so the question here, real quick, is, and Evan was alluding to this, where is this idea that we've got to kill ourselves for our profession to make ourselves, is it to make ourselves feel successful that we're putting in all of these hours and extra time and, the overabundance of, days away from our family sometimes? I mean, is it a learned thing? Is it you're programmed? I actually had my wife read this article from Andrew Maynard, and she was just like, yeah, it sounds like what you guys do all the time. You don't, she was telling me, she goes, you don't feel like you've, put in the time if you're at home and, like say a project architect or something is working on my project and they're at the office. She's like, you feel guilty that you're not there. So you usually, kids go to bed, I'll run back to the office and, pitch in and try to, help get things done. And, is it a guilt type feeling? Is it you're pre-programmed in architecture school? I mean, I think, Evan, you were kind of alluding to something like that, you're almost programmed that you need to eat, sleep, breathe architecture, or you're not any good at it.
Yeah.
I mean, am I wrong here?
I think that we are kind of programmed from school that this requires all of your attention and then some. I mean, I've said it before, when I was in school, I didn't have a life outside of architecture school. This is all I did for 5 years. And yeah, I did a few things over the summer, but after the first year, I took summer school every year to try to stay on track, because when I started architecture school, my studio professor told me, and everybody in the class, oh yeah, you only need to take this many units, and it wasn't enough. And so it kind of screwed us for the rest of the 5 years that we were in school. We all had to work extra hard to catch back up. But I think we are programmed to work late into the night and to try to put off sleeping. Sleeping is you can do that when you're not in studio. And I'm just wondering, if we carry too much of that into our profession. And one of the things that these articles publish, or that they talk about, is they talk about the all-nighters, and they talk about the situations that people are put into that we think is normal, but it really isn't normal when you compare it to other professions. And I think that that's kind of the rub, right? Where it's like, look, you guys might think this is normal, but think again, is this really normal? Because it's not. There's plenty of other professions out there, and there's plenty of other professions that make a lot more money where you just don't have to put in as much time as architecture does.
That's true of the business school at the college I went to. Lights were never on at night over there.
Yeah, and I think even if you look at maybe the breakdown of professions within an architecture office, because there's a lot more than just architects working in an office. There's accountants, there might be legal, there might be marketing, there might be people who deal with financing and entitlement type things. If you look at the different professions within a firm, the people who are working on the projects, especially in the beginning stages of the projects, those are the people putting in the hours, and they are the ones who are there after the lights are off. And I don't feel like the other professions really are. and I'm not sure if that's self-inflicted. Maybe that's a time, maybe there's something to talk about. Is that a time management issue, or is that it was designed to fail from the beginning, where people who are out of touch with the actual process are creating schedules that are unobtainable? I mean, there's lots of reasons why I, like I said before, I try not to do all-nighters if I don't have to, and I try not to work late if I don't have to, but it sometimes does happen. Um, maybe it's just that we're perfectionists and we're not ready to let go until it's actually done. I think there's a lot of reasons why we choose to stay late, but it's way beyond. The big picture is that it is the architects in the office, the ones who really care about the projects, or who are the ones who are staying late. Or maybe they don't care, but they're forced to stay.
Well, but does caring for a project mean that you have to kill yourself for the project?
Right.
I mean, because it doesn't. I mean, maybe that's the root of the problem is that just because you care about the project, it could mean that you're mismanaging it because you're not using your resources effectively to to get that project to plan that project out. So it's maybe it's a planning failure that you've that you're unable to balance your time between a lot of times. I mean, the reality is that because I don't really want to sound like the only reason that I'm staying late is because I'm mismanaging my time. To be quite honest with you, I've got 3 projects going on at the same time, at various stages of the process. And, I was just commenting this to a buddy of mine at work, a fellow project manager, and it was just like, the most, sometimes I stay late or I come in early because that's the only time I can actually get the actual work I need to get done. Otherwise, I'm on the phone, I'm, talking with clients and things like that, it was interesting as, another comment I made to him is, he said this, to me, and I've said it before. People who aren't in like a project management position, like the, recent graduate or the interns or something, like, man, it must be great. You just sit around all day, you're on the phone, you don't really do anything. Well, the funny thing is that the things that you have to do when you're on the phone, sometimes are probably more important to the project, either the completion of the project or the, funding of the project and all that other stuff. They just don't understand that, some of the project management stuff that isn't just down in the trenches clicking away on a mouse drawing are equally as important to the project in the process of the project than, just clicking away.
Yeah, and I think that also stems from school, where you are doing the work, all of the work all the time because you're working on your own. Which is a lot different than working on a team in an office, or even working by yourself in an office where you do have to handle all of that stuff. And I think it's interesting how you just said that you will come back to the office or stay late to get the actual work done, and that you separate that from what you just said, being the phone calls and the process of gathering all the information, right, or doing the funding, where maybe that isn't considered doing the work, but it's just as important. I think that's a very interesting distinction. And I think that plays through the entire profession of architecture, where we feel like we aren't working on the project if we're not actually drawing on it, but we are.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing where I think you don't really get that in school until you actually have to do it for real. But it's so true.
And I think that's actually, one of the failings of school is that, and it probably is what has led us down this path of almost like this systemic arrogance, that I'm the only one who should be working on this project to get it done, because, it's almost this, we've created the atmosphere of if I want to get it done, I'm the only person, I'm the only one to get it done. And it's not, we don't create teamwork. Um, One of the biggest things that I saw in architecture school at Auburn was the architecture school is actually called the College of Architecture, Design, and Construction. And we've got industrial design, we've got interior design, architecture, construction management, and things like that. A lot of our classes work hand in hand with the construction classes, but there's this, kind of preconceived idea that it's us against them type atmosphere. That the contractors are just out to get us and stuff like that. So we're breeding this animosity between the two professions that rely most on each other. We do the drawings, they do the building. We know what we want to go into the building, they know how to put the building together. So it by the very nature of what we're doing, we either should be one and the same type profession, or at the very least, should be in each other's camp, supporting and working with each other. And I think school in general, for some reason, creates a me attitude that, I'm the only one who can get this done. Whereas what we should be teaching is more of almost a project management type thing of, this is what it really takes to get it done. This person, this person, this person, this person, to create this mentality of teamwork, so that we're not always having to rely on ourselves, or believing that we only need to rely on ourselves to do the work, and that we actually start relying on the team to do the work. And then that changes the philosophy of projects, and that each person's key, role is a key to the success of the project. You get where I'm going?
Yeah, I think that I even see that amongst architects in the community that I live in, where they don't feel like there's room for other architects in the community.
Yes.
Right. And
yes.
that kind of drives me crazy, because I think they're looking at it exactly the wrong way, where they should be looking at it like there's plenty of room for great design. There is more than enough room. And it shouldn't be all about that person. And then when it comes to working on a team, what you're talking about, I think, is just authorship, right? And that is something that's brought up in the Maynard article on ArchDaily. And he's talking about how you kind of have to get over the authorship problem. You have to realize that there is absolutely no way you can do this all by yourself. And I think that is what a lot of people fail to see when they're working in these firms, when they're striving to get to the next level as fast as possible. And they are feeling like they are the only ones who can work on the project and the only ones who can do it right. They're failing everybody around them by thinking that, because they're not leaving any room for those other people to do the work that they can do. And if a manager doesn't trust his team to do the work that they can do, why would that team want to work with them? Why should that person be pushed up to the next level when they don't trust anybody that they're working with? When they can't actually say, you know what, you can do this better than me, so I should be able to trust you and give this to you and let you stand on your own to do it. It's really hard to work for people like that. But I think that happens a lot. I think you get people in charge of projects who feel like they can do it better than everybody else. Everybody else is doing something wrong, and they're putting in all the hours, and they have to be seen as putting in all the hours because they're working harder than everybody else. And that, first of all, it's going to kill you. But second of all, no one wants to work with that person.
Right. I mean, I always talk about with, the people who are, working with me, that are fresh out of school and stuff. It's like, I'm training you to take over my job. So then that frees me up to move up. But then as you move up, we're collaborating so that we both can continue to move up. Because ultimately, I want to retire, but I want to retire knowing that you're ready to take over.
Yeah.
So it's this, I'm helping you, you're helping me, I'm helping we, kind of thing.
That's a
It sounds,
parenting. I think that's a parenting attitude. I think people have the opportunity to learn that when they're parents because
yeah,
you want your kids to do better than, like, I want to do better than my parents did. I want my kids to do better than I'm doing. And at work, it's the same way. I want someone to come take my place and kick ass and do much way better than I can do.
but for some reason, wherever it's happening, and it could be in school, or it could just be inherent to, everybody, they feel threatened
Yes.
when they're not, so we hired Evan to be this top-notch designer. So, he's going to come in, he's going to kick ass, he's going to, show everybody how it is to design. So Evan's the golden boy. Then somebody comes in who's as talented or has drive. Does Evan now feel, rather than feeling challenged, Evan now feels threatened that somebody's there, the new golden child is going to take his place and take over for him. And it should actually be that, wow, now we're going to get better. Now we've got two people. It's usually oh shit, now he's going to take my place. And I need to do whatever it takes to secure my position, so I'm going to work harder. I'm going to be here all the time. When the boss comes in, I'm already here. When the boss leaves, I'm still here. And so then you start to create this self-sacrifice for your job that then affects, what the topic is of the, work-life balance. Because now you're starting to sacrifice everything that you're working for just for work.
Well, I think as soon as you start thinking about your perception in the office, you're losing focus on the real thing, right?
Yes.
As soon as you're worried about what other people think, as soon as you're worried about how people perceive you, then you can see that your focus is off.
I wonder how much of that happens in larger offices compared to smaller offices, though.
I'm sure it. You know what? I mean, in a way, we're bred this way.
Maybe so.
We're taught. I mean, we really are. If you think about it, think about architecture school and the way we're taught to essentially compete against each other. So we're breeding, this kind of me attitude. I was
that was something, by the way, I did not like about architecture school. I didn't like that. I've never liked that entire competitive environment. Always excelled much more so in a collaborative environment, and I think we've probably talked about that maybe before.
But I mean, it bears repeating is that how many times, think about your school, how many times did you give a presentation as a team, and how many times did you give a presentation as an individual?
Well, it was definitely more lopsided towards the individual than the team. For
Right.
sure. We did a few team projects.
How many times were you on a team where you didn't trust what anybody else did because they were slacking and you felt like you had to do everything just because they weren't doing anything?
But isn't that kind of cyclical, kind of creating what you were talking about is once you start focusing?
Yeah. But at the same time, you see people who just aren't pulling their own weight. I mean, that is a reality too.
And I think in school, you can get away, people think that they can get away with it more because there's nothing, there's no consequences. Whereas in the professional world, if you're slacking, there's several consequences. There's either the project will fail, you'll lose your job.
Right. Yeah, that's a big one.
Things like that. So there's all these consequences that, working as a team and being part of the team atmosphere, when we're not teaching that in school, we're automatically teaching everybody to fail. It goes, towards this other, topic that we can talk about and kind of go off on several different tangents of it. And it's procrastination that's rampant in architecture. It's kind of this, well, don't worry about it. I got plenty of time. You give yourself this false sense of security that you've got like a 6-month project, so you only really need to work on it for 2 months, when you're killing yourself in that 2 months, probably not getting the job done right, when you're only spending 2 months of time that you really had the 6 months. And you're ending up doing, back to where we're talking about, where you're overworking yourself unnecessarily because you didn't manage your time and you didn't manage the project properly. But again, I don't want to get off on that particular tangent, because that's, for me, that's a pet peeve of my own, because I'm guilty of it often.
Well, I wonder how much of all of this, feeling of having to work and kill yourself on a project or in an office all the time is, I was going to say, is this an American problem? Evan, you were mentioning earlier, are we just bred this way, or is this just the way we have to do it? And then, as I look back, I say, okay, well, Andrew Maynard's an Australian architect, so, maybe it isn't just strictly a U.S. sort of condition. Although I will say, the year I lived in Italy, now granted I was in school, I wasn't working for a living, but I definitely did get the sense from those around me that there was a better live-work balance in Italy. And I'm obviously overgeneralizing. I only saw a small part of life there, but and as a college student, maybe you could make the same remarks about the United States as well. But I just got a different sense of live work in Europe compared to live work in the United States. And if we do have listeners from around the world, I'd love to hear your opinions on how that is perceived, or how this subject is perceived in your country. And let us know if it's everywhere, or is there a better, some places where it's better, because then we'll all move there.
Yep.
Well, even this Anthony Ling follow-up, he's São Paulo-based architect. So, he's, dealing with some of the same issues. It's kind of interesting to read these articles, and they're usually from, either a stateside, architect. I know that Jody writes for, Jody Brown writes for them. Sometimes, you'll see something from Bob, Borson, and all these other different people who are more stateside, feeling kind of the similar pains that we feel. But then you also start to see other architects from all across the, globe basically feeling the same pain. So it's, it would almost be interesting to, write a PhD dissertation on what it is, what's creating this systemic, misery that, and I don't want to call it misery, but, why is it that, architects across the globe feel pretty much the same way? What is it that we're doing to ourselves?
Well, and how much of it is based on the economy that we're in? I think one of my colleagues said it really well when he said, everybody in my office is working 150% because they've laid off enough people who do the work where everybody's feeling it. That has to be part of it. I know that it happens in good economies as well, but we're probably really feeling it, especially now.
Evan, I don't think that changes much whether the economy's bad or the economy's good. Throughout my career, whether the economy was good or bad, there was always that perception of, I got to get in earlier, or I got to stay later than everyone else because I'm the one who's working the hardest. I want to show that I'm doing the most, and at the next time I have my review, I'm going to get a better raise than the guy next to me or someone else in the office, or I'm going to get promoted faster. And Cormac, your response to some of that is in and I'm gonna quote you because I love this in Andrew Maynard's article where he states, "If I work longer hours, I will get promoted and paid better." And your response was, "No, never." And
Exactly.
that is so true.
Yeah, that is true.
And especially when the economy, has starting in, '06, late '06, into '07 and '08, started falling off, it likely didn't matter whether you were the one putting in the most hours or not. You still got laid off. Didn't protect you, didn't save you. Maybe there's a few people out there, and those of you that, did protect, let us know if that works, because I think most of us find, or many of us, the three of us find that that's not often true.
No, I don't think it's true. That's a tough space to be in, because I know guys who do that because they're concerned about the perception, and I think there's a couple of mistakes that people make there. Number one, there's guys that I know who do that but don't charge their overtime, or they don't ever write it down to the job. So
and that's horrible.
It's horrible because the business doesn't know what it actually takes to get the work done.
That's right, exactly.
And so the client never pays for it. And the client, you're basically telling the client that I got all this done in 3/4 or half the amount of time that I actually got it done. But number two, they're saying, well, I'm always, and I'm doing the air quotes right now, profitable for the company. When the truth is, you just donated all that time, right?
Right.
And that's also something that's brought up in these two articles is, you're donating your time and your company is just saying, hey, thanks for the extra money. You just totally are helping us out on our profit margin. And then what I've run into, the last couple of years is, this year, no merit increases, no bonuses. Sorry guys, but it's just not in the books.
Right. Yet you just spent, say you're being billed for 40 hours a week, but you just gave them 60, 70 hours.
Right.
So you've donated them 30 extra hours per week on these projects.
For what?
Exactly. For what? For nothing in return. It's that no, never. You won't get paid more. You won't get, promoted because, especially in a down economy, killing yourself for greater reward really won't come because there's no reward to have. Really, in a down economy, The only reward to have is to keep your job.
And it's just gambling. And it's really interesting to me to see how people can't gamble with money, but they will gamble with their time and attention. And what I mean by gambling is you don't know if it's going to pay off in the end. And I will say that, in the last 4 years, it has not paid off. And you are directly stealing that time from your family if you have one. And if you're not feeling it, somebody else is. So it's your wife, it's your kids, it's whoever it is. They're the ones who are really feeling it and paying the price because you're willing to give all this away for free to the company.
Exactly. I made a couple of notes that you guys saw when I shared this PDF of these articles, and I made this a couple of notes, just kind of as questions, of does the extra hours really pay off? It's I work more because I want a better life. These are some of my notes. Will you have a better life by actually working more? Will your future better life really happen if it's at the cost of your current life? And that's actually the one that, kind of in response to what you just said, Evan, is this future life that you're hoping for to be better, once I move up in the company or once I'm making more money, that's when everything will pay off. You're really the harder that you work, in a way, it's almost the more inefficient way that you work early on in your career to kind of set yourself up for this better life will continue to be a problem all the way through. So you're never going to really achieve that better life if you can't like manage your current life.
Yeah, and again, I'll cite a couple of movies that you can watch on Netflix that have to do with really famous architects or wanting to be famous architects who gave it all to architecture and ended up, everybody else paid the price. And if you look at John Lautner's movie, Infinite Space, that's what it's called. And the other one is the one with Glenn Small, where it's My Father the Genius, and even the Louis Kahn movie, My Architect.
Yeah,
and it's like wow, these guys gave it all, and other people paid the price, and they probably felt like they were paying the price too. It's pretty painful, and one thing that a quote that I've heard recently, and I don't know who to attribute it to. I need to look it up, but it's, architecture is a harsh mistress. You give your life to it, and what do you get in return? It's very little. It is a very difficult profession to go into, and one of the things that was stated in one of these articles was like, architecture doesn't pay that much, but most people going into it know that. Number one, I would say that most people that I tell that architecture doesn't pay much are like, really? I thought it did. I don't think most people know that. Versus how much you work, how many hours you put into it. I don't think it's that well known of what it actually takes of people to do it. And that's something that, they say your studio instructors lie to your face. It says that in one of these articles that, they're lying. They're telling you a story of how great it is. And it really is difficult to find that balance, I think, because it is so demanding. There is so much work to do. Architecture is pretty complicated. It's one of those things where I don't think people really realize it until they feel like they're in it so far that they don't know what else to do. And then there's the other ones of us who are like, yeah, it's hard, but man, I wouldn't do anything else. It's just so fulfilling to work on these projects and work with these people. And so, I think one thing that we should talk about is what can we do about this? Because some practical things might be appropriate.
Well, I think also, too, before we get to that, I think we shouldn't just, we shouldn't forget that a lot of professions are difficult. Yeah. A lot of jobs are difficult. And I think anyone as a young teenager, early 20s, you're in college and there's a perception of, I don't know, there's no understanding maybe that how difficult different jobs are. And they're all difficult. And in fact, I like what Andrew Maynard says in his article about lawyers, and that there's a perception that you work a lot of hours as a lawyer, and what he says there is that the difference between law and architecture is that lawyers are typically paid very well, and that's so true, and doctors too as well. But I think all these professions, doctors, lawyers, architects, they're all difficult, and so I don't think we should just say our profession is hard and nobody else's is as hard. I don't think they're all necessarily equal either. But this is a difficult profession. It's art. And sometimes unless it's a painting, or some other sort of sculpture that there's some extreme value added to it, the perception of art is you only see sometimes, and here's the problem. You only see what's either printed or built, oftentimes. You see the end product, I guess. What you don't see are the 50 iterations or the hundreds of iterations that go into producing that piece of art. Or if it's a painting, maybe it's been painted several times or drawn multiple times, to produce this thing at the end. And so, it's just like, oh, well, you just drew a few lines there. Okay, great. Yeah. That couldn't be worth thousands of dollars. Well, but I took thousands of hours to get to those few lines, or that one design or that design at the end, or the countless hours that go in the negotiation part between either the client or the city, between you and the city and the consultants and everybody else working, hopefully, as Cormac mentioned earlier, we all need to work as a team, and all of that coordination time. Those are sometimes the hidden hours. As you mentioned, Cormac, your coworker, all you do is talk on the phone, and that's great. That seems like a pretty easy job. But that is part of the job as well. All that coordination, all that time. In fact, as you mentioned, that may be even more important than putting the lines on the computer or putting the walls in the computer, because sometimes that portion of the job, that communication and the hand holding, that gets the next job.
Yeah,
and if you don't do that, then the next job doesn't come. And then that guy drafting who thinks he's so damn important won't have a job.
Right. It's the, someone's got to land the job. Someone's got to keep the job. And someone's got to go and get the next job.
And someone's got to do the job.
Do the job, exactly.
and then someone's got to do the job, of course, and sometimes it's one and the same when you're a sole practitioner, and sometimes it's with a team. But yeah, I was going back to what you were saying, Evan. You had said that our professors lie to us. This whole time that we've been talking about this, I've been thinking about when I was the 17-year-old kid going to the Army recruiting station, listening to all of this, razzmatazz of what I would be doing in the Army. And I remember my senior year, we'll just basically say, I wasn't the most studious kid when I was growing up, and I knew I wasn't going to go. I knew I wanted to go to college, but I knew I wasn't going directly to college. Mentally, I wasn't prepared for it, and my grades didn't sort of reflect it. There was some growing up I needed to do, so I knew I was going into the Army. And my senior year was spent, glamorizing. Oh, I'm going to be shooting planes down. I'm going to be air defense artillery. It's going to be the greatest thing in the world. I can't wait to do it. Man, when I got there, it was it was hard. It was a tough, hard job. It was fun, it was kind of rewarding in a way, but it was tough. And it's, and I liken it very much to, my life in architecture is that, it's tough, but, the people who do it and stick with it and, aren't the ones who are sitting there complaining every day about how much they hate their job, are the ones that have accepted that it's tough and just, love it enough to keep doing it through all of the tough jobs. It's like a marriage, Sure, there's going to be some rocky road. There's going to be some tough times. There's going to be some financial things here and there. But it doesn't mean that you love the person any less. And it's the same thing with the job. It doesn't mean you love it any less. It's just you got to work through those little difficult times. And, it's just kind of, so it's just, you've got to be able to, look at it, understand what you've gotten yourself into, and either make a decision early on that this wasn't exactly what you wanted to do and move on, or, just embrace the fact that, this is exactly what you wanted to do. And, enjoy the ride, because it's not going to be easy. Was that my pep talk to all of the future graduates?
Well, I was thinking when you were saying that about how they were selling you, down the river when you're going into the Army, about all the things that it could be versus when you actually got into it and what it is. I was thinking that's exactly like architecture.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's you get out of school thinking that, you have these grand visions of what it's going to be like, and then when you actually have to do it, it's all those little things that you have to do, and those clients you have to deal with, and the phone calls that you have to make, and all those are what really define what you do and how you're going to handle the next situation. And all of those little things are opportunities for you to learn. And I think that, one big mistake that a lot of people make is when they get out of school, they feel like they've learned it, when actually you've just been given a taste, and you're going to be learning every day. And if you look at it like that, it makes a huge difference in how you are going to take on the profession and move along in it. I mean, every day to me is a huge learning opportunity, and it is a lifelong learning that you are about to embark on, even as you're just graduating. It's almost just beginning at that point.
Well, how much of this problem of life-work balance is also our own fault when we don't adequately tell our clients how long a project really is going to take, or we make promises so that we can get that job and do it in 6 weeks when really it's 3 months, and so therefore we only bill, or we're only charging for that 6 weeks, or to get the price to where we think our client's going to accept it, and instead it's really a 3-month project and should be billed as or feed, have a fee of a 3-month project or a 6-month, whatever it might be. And when we cut that in half, we cut our fee in half, and then suddenly, okay, now we're constantly, from day one, when you start the project, you're over budget. And
you're subsidizing the project.
Yeah, you're subsidizing the project, exactly. Mm-hmm. And so I wonder how much of this live-work balance is the common perception of what we do, and that it's not that hard, and it's not that complex. Now, granted, developers, when they walk in the door, understand it's more complex. But even then, they go, okay, well, we need it in less time, and we need it to cost less. So we make those sacrifices. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen in other professions as well. But, when we do that, we're causing our problem, because now we have to get it done in those 6 weeks, or that 6-month project in 3 months. So that just throws our life-work balance. It's unbalanced at that point, and we've created it.
Well, here's an issue, thinking about clients who may or may not understand the perception of what we do, how long it takes for us to do it, the set budgets and things like that. I mean, most clients, and I'll say that some of the clients that Evan and I have with being, working in the, like with public schools and things like that, they've got a limited budget. So they're already going into it saying that we're going to spend X amount of dollars on, design and engineering services. We really can't spend any more than that, because the rest of it needs to go into, our construction budget, or our, FF&E, the, furnishings and things like that, go into the project that are part of the overall, capital construction budget. So they're already going into it with this set budget. They know that, or they have the perception that architects are a dime a dozen, in that if they say they need it done in 6 weeks, and you say, yeah, I can do it in 6 weeks and I can do it for that amount of money, that if you don't, or you can't, then they can go out and just find somebody else. And the problem is there's another architect out there that will say, I'm going to do, Neil says that he can do it for 10% of the budget. I'm just throwing arbitrary numbers out there. Well, Evan's out there, and he's like, I can do that same job in 3 weeks less for 8% of the budget. And so they're like, oh, well, we're going to go to Evan. Now Neil was probably telling him the actual time and the actual like time it takes to get the project done, and also the actual budget it takes to get it done. But that doesn't really matter to them because now they've just saved 2% and they're going to get something delivered quickly. Whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent, we do that to ourselves a lot. And this economy has done it, kind of forced our hands. I mean, we see it in the construction industry where, we have contractors, and I've said this before, where contractors will bid for 0% project or profit so that they can get the project. Maybe, trying to find some change orders here and there to get their money back or just to break even. Architects do the same thing. So we're not doing ourselves any service by cutting each other's throat.
Yeah, I think that definitely happens. And if you take it even further to the competition market, where people are basically working for free, it becomes even a bigger issue at that point. But yeah, I think that is one of the things that plagues our industry is, and not just our industry, but lots of different types of design industries where people feel like they just need to get the work so that they're doing the work, even if they're not making any money or even losing money, so that they can get their foot in the door for the possibility of having another job. That happens all the time, and that's what it's designed to fail.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, think about it. I mean, we try, like when we're marketing, we'll do a lot of like upfront for free, not-for-profit work, just for the potential to land the job.
We show up at the interview with a design that we haven't talked to anybody on the client side about. Here it is. Here's the design. What do you think?
And think about all of the unpaid man hours that it took to get you to just that point before you even get the job. And, then they're like, well, if they can deliver this, then, they can easily, work towards this unrealistic schedule and this unrealistic budget and everything else because, they've already shown that they can, do this. So, we never really sit down and have that, heart to heart with our clients and say, well, it took us, 200 man hours to get to this point. And they're like, wow, well, then what does that mean for the rest of my project? We never want to admit to them, the reality, the truth behind the veil, or as we always, as we say in our intro, we don't ever want them to peek under the kimono.
Yeah. The realities.
Exactly. If and I think that's part of, that learned, those learned problems that we have is that, we want people to think we're Superman, and when they realize that we're not Superman, then, it's just like, oh my God, what will happen? Will we get another job from them? We're always in this, CYA protect yourself kind of mode, no matter what position, what time of the project, we're always in this protect yourself kind of mode. And that goes back to what we were saying about the individual architect who's working on a project. They're always, when you said it best, Evan, when you start to think about what other people are thinking about you, then you're too preoccupied with perceptions and not preoccupied with the project.
Yeah.
Well, don't we want to believe that we're Superman, though? That we can do that?
We want to. I mean, everybody in every profession always wants to be the best and wants to have somebody have themselves believe that they're the Superman at their job. I think that's just a simple human trait, really.
Well, do you guys have any practical kind of advice for people who are struggling with a work-life balance. There was a time where there's always times when you wonder, am I doing this right? Is my balance what it should be? In my typical, obviously I have someone I can bounce that off of. I can talk to my wife and say, what do you think about this? Or you could just see the look in their eyes when you say, I'm going to have to stay late tonight, and work on this. Or you can hear the strain in their voice when they're talking about what has to happen, that night. I mean, what do you guys think is a good approach to having a good work-life balance?
I think one thing that helps, and this isn't necessarily something you do to make it happen, is you stop worrying about it a little bit. And what I mean by that is you stop worrying about how you're perceived in the office, as Andrew was talking about in his article, how he was perceived negatively and not being a team player. I think part of it is you don't worry about it, and maybe you can kind of justify that a little bit by, if you do have a family, you can say, well, family's more important. And sometimes your bosses will understand that. Maybe they have their own families. And sometimes your bosses don't understand that. I had a boss once that didn't have a family, didn't understand. Oh, kid's sick today, I can't come in. But at some point in time, you just stop worrying about it. So, I don't really, I'm not really concerned about what you think. This is my life. I'm going to live it the way I want to. And, unless my name's on the door, you don't worry about it. And even when your name is on the door, as a few of us have worked for ourselves, there's a certain point in time when you just have to stop and say, well, I got to take care of me and my life, and I'll do what I can, for your project and to make this happen. And maybe that means you don't get the next project. I don't know, but I'd rather almost not have that next project and be happy.
I think a practical approach that I hardly ever see anybody take is to communicate.
Yeah.
I think that there is communication with your higher ups, or if there aren't higher ups, it's with your client. And I think a little bit of communication can go a long way in those instances, because they definitely come up when you say, you know what, this is going to take longer than I thought.
Evan, I think you're dead on about the communication, and I think that that goes back to what I was saying just before. That was it's that switch in your head. It says, maybe I'm not Superman. There's only so many things I can do, and then if you communicate with your client that it's not going to happen between here and Monday. What can we do, to make it right? Or set that expectation of, okay, it's not, we talked in an earlier podcast, to take your time estimates and multiply by 3, but be realistic with your clients, or your managers, or project architects, whoever you're working with, and say, I think this is really going to take this long. And if that's unacceptable, then you can communicate, sit down and say, well, how can we get it done in this amount of time? Do we need to add more people? Do we need to cut the scope? Do we need to change the scope so that, we deliver, or change the deliverables? We deliver X, Y, and then maybe Z comes later. And if you can communicate that with your client, and say, hey, this is reality. This is what we can do, and be honest with them and make them part of the team as well. I think you're right. That's a practical thing that you can do to make that go well. Or this just makes so much sense, because recently I had was working on a project where scope was added, and the timeline, the budget, nothing was changed. And so it's like, we're shooting ourselves in the foot. We've added more work, and yet we have less time and less money to do it. That's just wrong. You need to go back to that client, and as hard as it may be, and maybe that client gets unhappy and walks away. But, you're being honest with yourself, you're being honest with the client, and this is what you can do. Or if they've added scope, then, there's added money that costs. Or if you're not going to get paid for that, then you need to work out something else.
Well, it definitely reinforces the need for communication. And I think that's, you guys have both said it, pretty well, that the lack of communication is probably what we strive for more, only because we tend to walk on eggshells with our clients and don't want to piss them off, because we do want the return business, and you never allow yourself the opportunity to know whether or not that client will be open to additional services or not, if you're not going to talk to them about them and be genuine about what their requests have done to the project, what they've done to the fee structure that already exists, what they've done to the schedule and things like that. And maybe it comes to the point where they're, maybe we don't need this extra bathroom or a steam shower or something if it's going to affect this much, or maybe the additional classrooms because we don't want, we aren't going to have redistricting, but we were going to go ahead and throw them in there anyway. Maybe they don't need them, but these are things that if you don't talk to them about it, you're not going to do yourself or even your client any justice.
Well, one thing that I would even add is that as we talk to our clients, they get to decide, right? And if you get in the right mindset, you can put things in front of them where they get to decide, so that it's very clear that they get to make the choice between A and B, or
right.
They get to make the choice. Okay, do we come up with the extra money or do we cut program? There's so many choices that can be made, but you allow them to make the choice. And that's a huge position of power for both of you to be in. It's very important for us to realize that we are serving them, but that they have to direct us what to do when it comes to those decisions.
Evan, you just described a very good parenting example. When you're raising your children, let them decide. Give them that authority, that power to do that. It's a good way to, raise your kids too.
Yep.
Yeah.
They still complain. And your clients probably will too.
True.
Well, it's a great way to put things in perspective and to give options and just say, hey, you tell me what you want. And that's a great way to kind of dig yourself out of a hole that you might be in, but it's a completely ethical and legitimate way to do that.
But, let's kind of circle back around to the opening topic of the work-life balance and how communication fits into all of that too, because, we've got, open communication with your clients and things like that do have an effect on the work aspect of it, but how does communication as a tool for, balancing your work and your life actually come into play? And I think it's even more important then because, both of you guys said, it's, having that communication between, your friends and your family on, whether or not, work kind of gets in the way or vice versa, or whether or not, like, say there's a problem in your office, or at least a perceived problem that you have in the office that's, kind of making you distant or, or just kind of stressing you at work. A lot of times, a lot of people may not see the same issues that you guys have. Your project manager may not see that, there's a problem between, two coworkers and stuff, and so it's kind of affecting the overall quality of the project or the schedule of the project and things like that. You got to talk to people about it. You've got to let people know that there's a problem, because sometimes they may never know it exists. So it kind of works its way back into, making your life, a lot easier within the actual environment.
In Andrew Maynard's article, he ends with talking about, giving us two options to obtaining a good work-life balance. And the first option is to work for oneself, although he adds to take the very real risk that one may go broke at any time. And the second option is to leave the profession. I think I might have mentioned earlier that, any profession is hard. So I don't really think option two is even really a realistic option.
Hopefully you figured that out when you were in school.
Let's hope so. I mean, if you leave the architecture profession and go be a lawyer, or, go do something else, even something that might be related, it's work. You're still going to work, even if you go, work at, flipping burgers, you still have to work. And, so I don't know, maybe he was just throwing that in there as, kind of to be funny or something, but I don't think that's realistic at all. And I don't think even working for oneself is necessarily, an option either. I mean, let me rephrase that, as the only option to have the good work-life balance, because even working for yourself, you have to carry many more hats, actually, and it may actually even be harder, I think, to obtain a good work-life balance. You get more flexibility, and maybe have more time, flexibility, but
I don't know about that either. That's another topic. Yeah.
Well, I think he was being rather genuine. I don't think he was being flippant at all about, his two options, because the way that he started the article off, he was talking about, I ditched commercial, architecture and went in for myself, at a really early age, in a really early level of, his architectural life. And for him, it was, my way or the highway type attitude for how he's, approaching, architecture. But that's, and as, he talked about in his article, that's not really an option for everybody in this profession. Not every architect can work for themselves, because if it is, you think that, architects eating themselves or cutting each other's throats is bad now. Wait till everybody works for themselves. You would never be able to get anything done, or you'd never get any work. It would just be, it would be chaos. And we think that, sometimes it's chaos now. It would be, pure anarchy. But I think that the Anthony Ling article was, disputing that you can get the life-work balance within a firm, by being the agent of change, whether or not it's, working on maintaining this plan. You've made a plan for the project. You've planned it all out, and I know, Evan, that you've talked about that every time. There's no plan. It always falls apart, and you just kind of it just happens. Sometimes you can plan it all out and strive to stay on task with that. And if you're diligent and not necessarily a procrastinator, no, I'm not calling anybody procrastinators, but you can, be able to kind of like balance that whole life out. I don't necessarily, we've talked about how hard architecture is, but we're, and we've mentioned that it's a labor of love, but, it sounds like we're almost, scaring people off that it's, don't do it because it's really, really tough and you'll never have a life. I don't think any of us are really actually saying that, because we all have a life.
Yeah.
We all have families. We all spend a lot of time with our families and do a lot of these things. And I think we actually do have a formula, albeit probably a strange formula, for the way that we have our work life, life work balance, going on. But it's, it's just, it's almost, we were talking about, well, what kind of advice do we have? Sometimes it's up to each individual person to kind of figure out how you maintain that work-life balance, how you individually approach each project, because let's face it, architecture is project-based. We live from project to project to project. So how does that project that we have right in front of our face, how does that interact with our non-architectural life? Or are they even separate? I mean, do we, like with me, I don't necessarily consider my personal life and my professional life completely separate. Yes, I don't bring my kids into work and things like that, but they, sometimes they're with me on the adventure of, going and surveying and building and stuff like that. But it's stuff that we can do together and have fun with. So there's kind of for me, there's kind of an intermixing of the two lives.
For sure.
That actually gives me enjoyment and fulfillment in that balance. And it might not be the same for other people. So, in a way, my personal advice is figure it out for yourself, but don't give up and think that it's just too tough and you can't do it. You can, and you will, with, the greater the knowledge, the greater the experience, the more you're going to actually figure out how to balance it all out.
Yeah, I don't want to scare people away either. I think that it's important to keep your priorities at the top of your to-do list.
Yes.
And so I'm a lot like you, Cormac, where my two worlds, if not more, are all completely intertwined, and so it just becomes a time management issue.
Yeah.
I think that where these articles are stemming from is kind of this perception of maybe people who've been in the industry for a long time and what they expect of people that they're hiring to work for them, but it's a real thing that every one of us is dealing with on some level, which is, we want to give our all to what we're doing. What we're doing is a very long list of things, and so yeah, we're trying to find a balance between all that stuff, and we don't want it to weigh too heavily to one side as if there were only two. But yeah, I think it's just keeping top of mind, what are your priorities? What are you willing to do? What are you not willing to do? And communicating that with the people that you work with, and keeping that communication active so that nobody gets the wrong idea. It's important that everybody knows kind of where you stand, and that's allowed to change over time. And it will.
Look at, for balance, look at, as you said, what are your priorities? What is it in your life that's going to make you happy? Always keep that in mind as your priority, and realize that if one outweighs the other, then what's gonna happen is you're gonna sacrifice something for something else. It's like say if you want to become the most successful architect that's ever been on the planet, is that endeavor going to basically push away like friends and family and things like that, or are those even important to you? So I think your perspective of always keeping the priorities front in your mind is an extraordinarily important thing to do.
If your priority is architecture, if your priority is your family, if your priority is playing guitar, you've got to be able to figure out a way to not only make it work for you, but it's got to work for the situation that you're in. And so if you're in a situation that doesn't allow for that, then you're going to have to take it upon yourself to change that situation. And I think that, a lot of people have more power than they think. No one's making you work somewhere that you don't want to be, or somewhere that doesn't value the same things that you value. And I think maybe that's where Andrew Maynard ultimately ended up, was that, he had to control his own destiny. And there's some people who are more comfortable controlling their own destiny than others. There's some people who are way more comfortable getting that steady paycheck and clocking in and clucking out every day. So you're going to have to pick what's best for you.
Well, that's not necessarily even, working for somebody else doesn't mean that you're not in control of your destiny, but, it's kind of working within a structured frame of
right.
of control.
Right.
Let me ask this, and just as a practical example from all three of us. I mean, we all, like I said, we all have families, and Evan, you kind of went through, family as important, and the architecture is important, and playing guitar is important, and things. And I know that those are all three, important to you. I know. For those of you who don't know, our intro and exit music is a side project of Evan's. All of these are. How do you intertwine all of that together? As an example, everybody knows, or at least has heard me talk about how my passion about drawing and all of that other stuff. And sometimes I'll go and sequester myself into a room and draw and things like that. But rather than to do it alone and by myself, kids are in there with me, and we're all drawing together. We're all making big piles of paper, and just so my passions are intermixing together. They're never they seem to never really truly separate. And to me, that's not only sharing my passion with my kids, but also kind of teaching them that not only is, your creative outlets and your passions and things like that important, but to share them is equally as important. And so those are kind of the things that I like to do with myself, and in my family, and I know for a fact, because as much as we talk and post and things like that, that's what you guys do too. I mean, you never separate your passions from your passions. I mean, I can't say you never separate your passions from your family, because your family is your passion. Your music is your passion. Your architecture, your profession is your passion. So I guess it's, and I don't want to drag this on, but it's just never think that you have to sacrifice one thing for the other.
Yeah, that whole balance thing, man, to me, it's just a huge juggling act. It gets to a point for me sometimes where it's like, okay, what do I need to do right now? Because if I don't keep this ball in the air, I'm going to drop three other things. And then there's other times where it's really clear that I've got to focus on this, and I've got to focus on it straight for 2 weeks. I mean, I don't know the right answer, but it all comes down to, again, it comes down to priorities, and you can only have, well, let's put it this way. The definition of a priority is it's getting done. Because if it's something that's really high on your list and you're not doing anything about it, it's not a priority, and you might want to think about taking it off your list. But the kind of person that I am, I've got my thumb in 5 different pies at one time, and they're all things that I care about, and it is sometimes really hard for other people, even other people who are really close to you, to understand. And it's not an easy decision to make, which one to do or to work on or to give attention to, but it's hard to prioritize sometimes what the thing is that you have to do right then. And I don't know the right answer for this, but they're all part of your life, and you've got to figure out how to take care of each one of those parts.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that your life and your work balance is really what you make of it. And that may sound very obvious, but I don't think you have to separate the two. I mean, obviously, they happen at different times, and whether that's different times during the day, during the night, during the weekend, or during the year, and those priorities will continually change based upon what you have to do. The teacher conference you have to go to, or the client meeting you have to go to that day, or to meet a certain deadline, and that's all just part of life. And so the way I kind of look at it, kind of stepping back, is it's all just life. And part of it you're working, and part of it you're playing, and, to keep a balance. And it's up to you to make that balance happen. I think it was you, Evan, that said nobody's making you work in a place that maybe you're not happy with, or that doesn't appreciate you. You can make that change. And, and that, if that's what makes you happy, then that's what makes your life-work balance work for you. And try not to let it get too out of whack. And, you do that, and at the end of the day, you look back and hopefully you're happy with how things went.
All right, well, should we wrap this thing up?
I think so.
For those of us who are still listening to the podcast here, you can follow us on archispeakpodcast.com or on Twitter at Archispeak. That's ARCHISPK. And you can find me at eTroxel, TROXEL.
You can find me on Twitter at NPANN.
And you can find me on Twitter at Archetype. That's ARCHY_TYPE.
All right. We'll see you guys next time.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
See ya.
Frank and you. My funeral was beautiful. Oh, we got it for days on end. Thank God I'm cut, 'cause of my kind of luck. I'll be up on the block in front of all of my friends. This is what you get. This is what you get. This is a schedule. This is a set. It's unpredictable lest you forget. If you blow, you can bet. I know. This is what you get. This is a schedule. This is a set. It's so predictable as you forget. If you blow, you can bet. I know. Top to the basement. Blow by blow, kinds of steel, very real, very rock, but it's still very rock body. Paper, scissors, sister, preach, deep, open the rig, back to synapse. Back jumps on pages after still the rage is a new tool and a toy book. And this is what you get. This is what you get. This is a schedule, this is a set. It's so predictable as you forget. If you blow, you can bet. I know.